Now let's move to China, as obviously super growth out there. Jim Rogers, in China, have they been using money that they have saved in the same way as Singapore, or do they create money? And I understand, if I believe I'm correct, where they don't really have a central bank. When they just create dollars, they inflate the currency, but they don't have to pay it back as we do with the private Federal Reserve.
Well, they do have a central bank. It's not like the private Federal Reserve. In that sense, you're right. There are very few countries now that don't have a central bank. By the way, central banks are not good as far as I'm concerned. The world's gotten along without central banks many, many times in history. In America, even, we've had 3 central banks. The first 2 failed. In my view, the one we have now, the Federal Reserve, is going to fail too, because it's being run by bumbling idiots who just don't know what they're doing. But back to China, they too have huge reserves, not on a per capita basis, nothing like Singapore, but they have the largest foreign currency reserves in the world, the largest foreign currency savings in the world. They're starting to spend some of them now to try to make sure their economy doesn't get badly hurt by the recession. Mm-hmm. But no, they at times they have inflation just like everybody else does. And one of the reasons they do is because so much money has come into the country because they've been so successful that at times they've had a little too much money, and they've had some bouts of inflation. Nothing serious yet. Do they have a way to suck out the money like we do with income taxes and other techniques? Well, they do have income. They have taxes not as high as we do in the U.S., but they certainly tax people. They impose bank reserves. They make the banks hold back a lot of money and not make loans at times, just as we do in the U.S. and most Western countries as well. So that's their way to do it, and they can always sell bonds to the public and suck money back in that way. We will take emails for Jim Rogers, also telephone calls, 888-663-6386, 888-663-6386. Email Patrick at oneradionetwork.com. You did very well, I hear, in the 70s when gold really took a nice run and we had the inflationary 70s. What can you make a comparison, Jim Rogers, to the 70s and today when it comes to inflation and commodities? Well, Patrick, we're setting ourselves up for something very similar to the 70s, I'm afraid. In the 70s, we had shortages developing of productive capacity for oil and agriculture and just about everything, mining of metals, and so the prices went through the roof, especially when the central bank, the Federal Reserve, was printing a lot of money. Well, the same thing is happening now, only worse. We have the Federal Reserve printing even more money now. It's staggering. Historically, it's never happened anywhere, any country that stayed solvent, how much money the Federal Reserve is printing, and it's at a time when we have shortages of capacity developing in raw materials. I mean, the inventories of food are the lowest they've been in decades. Nobody can open a mine, and the mines are depleting now. Oil reserves are depleting, so we're going to have the same thing, and it's not going to be fun. So you see gold and silver then moving a lot higher in the next 2 or 3 years? I know a lot's a loaded word. The next 2 or 3 years. I don't know about the next 2 or 3 years. I think silver will do better than gold, and that's because the IMF has huge. They're the second or third largest owner of gold in the world. IMF is desperately trying to sell their gold so that they can bail everybody out. So that's a big overhang on gold. I think silver will do better. I think agricultural products will do better. I think other real assets will do better, but I certainly own gold. Do not get me wrong, and if gold goes down, I'll buy more gold. If it goes up, I'll buy more gold. Now, there's certainly a plus when one gets real numismatic coins of gold and silver in their hands and stores them safely. What are some other ways that our listeners can invest in commodities where it's just not a piece of paper? Well, you can buy the real stuff. If you have a silo, you can buy all the corn you want. Yep. If you have a warehouse, you can buy all the cotton you want, or zinc, or anything else. That if you want to buy physical
assets, you can do it, and there are people who will store them for you if you don't have your own silo. So that's a way to do it. Or, as you point out, if it's gold and silver, platinum, you can buy coins or gold bars, silver bars. A lot of people do that. They're now traded on some stock exchanges. You can buy certificates, which are actually receipts. I mean, it's a receipt saying, you, Patrick, have 10 ounces of gold in the vault in Australia or Switzerland or wherever it happens to be. There are ways to do that. Now, that is a piece of paper, but it's actually a receipt. It's showing your gold, your number, the number of your bars, and where it is. There are also things called exchange-traded notes and exchange-traded funds, which in essence is where you're buying a basket of metals or agriculture, whatever it is you want to buy.
Do you think there's a chance, Jim Rogers, that exchange-traded funds could just go bad if things really went bad? Are there any risks there, do you suppose?
Well, there's risk to everything, Patrick, especially in the world we're coming in now. I mean, I'm afraid things are going to get bad enough in the U.S. that there's going to be social unrest, and not just in the U.S. I'm not picking on us. It's in many places. There already is social unrest in many countries. So I'm afraid you're going to see more problems, and if you start having people storming the barricades, of course, who knows what could happen. So if you have it in your backyard, you know where your gold is. On the other hand, if you have it in your backyard and the mob comes, they may take your gold from you. So there's all sorts of risks no matter what we do.
You're a very practical man, aren't you? You just kind of... you talked about the money that the Fed has created and that we've borrowed, and some people say it's going to be in the neighborhood of $13 trillion before this current era of whatever this stimulus stuff is called and what it is. That's going to be a huge impact on our present money supply of, what is it, Mr. Rogers, in the neighborhood of 15 or 16 trillion. Well, do you see massive inflation, hyperinflation, slow burn over the years? How do you think it's going to play out inflation-wise in the United States?
Well, first of all, we have inflation now. The government lies to us, as you probably well know, Patrick. I mean, anybody who shops for anything knows that prices have been going up over the past few years, no matter what the government tells us. That's mind-boggling. I mean, maybe your butler does your shopping, Patrick, but the rest of us who go shopping, we know that prices have been going up. Now, gasoline prices are down recently, but even then, they're still up a lot from where they were 5 years ago, despite what the government tells us. So we have inflation. It's going to continue to get worse. Partly because of what you said, the government is printing gigantic amounts of money. I mean, Patrick, what's happened here in the last year alone down in Washington or up in Washington is staggering. It's never happened where a country has taken on so much debt, created so much money in the history of the world. Now, in Washington, they tell you it's going to be okay. Don't worry, don't worry. We don't have inflation and we won't have inflation. Well, I tell you, that's balderdash. They're lying to us again, as they've lied to us. Not just our government, all governments lie. Again, I'm not picking on us. All governments lie, and these do just the same way.
And there's very little talk, except folks like yourself that talk about the interest on this $13 trillion, because of course, because of the central bank setup that we have, which everybody knows who listens to One Radio Network is private. It's owned by the boys that we call the boys. That we have interest on this debt, and it's a big hit every year, is it not?
Well, it's already become one of the, probably not the largest yet, but one of the largest components of where our tax money goes. I mean, we're just sending a lot of taxes to Washington just to pay the interest on the gigantic debt which has been built up over the decades. But again, Patrick, what they've done here in the last year is they've tripled, quadrupled, quintupled, nobody really knows yet, the amount of total debt which we, us poor saps who are American citizens and American taxpayers, we got to pay it off. People say, well, what about our children? I said, it's our children, it's us. What's happened now, it's going to be you, me, and everybody listening to your show who's going to have to pay for it.
And then we also, of course, pay out because we use these things we call dollars, and they're going to become worth less and less with each passing day.